What is up, everyone? I hope you're all good. Now today I'm taking the opportunity of a little bit of dry weather and I'm going to be cleaning and slightly draining my 4-year-old nature pond. I shouldn't need to drain it fully, but there are a few issues that I've noticed where if I leave them now, they're only going to get worse through the summer. Now, as normal, I let my nature pond get on with itself. I don't really touch it that much. But with that comes the problem of all the leaves dropping in from the trees, all of the plants in the pond as they break down for the winter. It all drops into the bottom of the pond. And I will net it. I net my pond out probably once every week or once every fortnight. But unfortunately, ponds like filling themselves in with rubbish. They're always, or generally, the lowest point in the garden. So they're always the one that collects all that leaf litter and all that muck. And it just builds up over time. And eventually you will get problems like I'm seeing in my pond now. So down in this bit of the pond, you can see some algae starting to form and starting to grow. Now, we're not getting much sunlight at the moment in spring here, but once this goes through to summer, it's going to get really bad. You can see a little bit more algae up in the stream and waterfall up here growing. It's just time that this pond needs a clean out. As I've said, it hasn't been cleaned out properly in 4 years. I've netted it and topped it up, but there's so much leaf litter coming in from this fuchsia and then from all the trees up here that, well, it's inevitable that it was going to get algae problems at some point. Now, a little bit of organic waste and fish poo and all of that in a pond isn't a great problem. You'll find that a lot of the plants use it up as a food source and it generally just gets broken down. The problem comes is as the pond gets older and older, more of that material is collected. And unfortunately, it gets to a point where the plants sometimes just don't keep up. This pond is 4 years old. I've not really had any need to clean it out properly until now. Some ponds you may find that if you've got less plants, you'll need to clean them out every year, every 6 months. Some ponds with more plants than this and maybe more shade or less trees, you might be cleaning out once every 5, 6, 7 years. That's something I encountered in the aquarium and pond trade, is that every pond is different. My pond might get 8 hours of sunlight, your pond might get 5 hours of sunlight. And it just changes the balance so much. And again, the trees, the bugs, the bees, the plants, they all have an impact on it. And your fish, if you've got fish in there. They all have an impact on the cleanliness and how much you're going to need to clean your pond. But anyway, we need to get on and clean this before the sun goes in because it's warm, it's dry, I need to crack on. Right, so the first thing I always do is test my water. Now, I always use the NT Labs Pond Lab because it covers all the basics you're going to need to worry about in your pond. Now, the main thing with my pond being old that I'm going to be testing for today is the nitrate, because the nitrate is the last waste level and generally it's the one that ends up building up in a pond because the plants can't keep up with the amount of waste that's producing in there and there's not really any bacteria that break down nitrate. There are in specific circumstances, and I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments, I know, but they don't happen very often in a pond that easily. So the nitrate is the one I'm going to be worrying about because that is the main food source for this algae. The other one I am going to be sort of checking and making sure it's okay is the pH and hardness of the pond. The reason for this is because after a pond has been set up for this long, with that much waste and muck and decaying matter in there, the pH can start to drop. And if it's really, really low, some algae treatments won't work. Some, well, I haven't got fish, but some fish treatments don't work as well. So you've always got to read the label because if your pH and KH is real, well, pH, GH and KH hardnesses are really low, then it can cause you problems in other ways. Right, so let's get the testing out of the way. There is a testing video already on my channel for aquariums and the kit is very, very similar. So you can go over to that and watch it. I will produce a pond sort of test video at some point, but that'll be a later date. Let's get the pond tested and check what I need to change or I need to do or I need to clean. Everything on the test kit is actually testing up all right. The ammonias, the nitrite, as I knew, were going to be okay. The nitrate was slightly elevated, which will be causing a little bit of this algae, but nothing to worry about when it comes onto the fish side of things in life. You have to get really high on nitrates before it poses a problem for them. You can see the pH, there you go. So you can see the pH is slightly lower than normal, but again, nothing really to worry about. So I think a good clean on this pond right at the start of the season now, I think it should sort it out. When giving your pond a good clean, you may need to gear it around your pond and have a look at what's going on. Obviously, if there's things breeding in there like fish or like frog spawn or anything like that, you may want to leave it for a few weeks until that's settled and gone away. If, like my pond, there's nothing really going on, there's a few bugs and a few bits and pieces but nothing major, then you can crack on with the cleaning. My frogs this year laid in a bucket of water away from the pond, and I set up a secondary pond on the other side of the garden for them. So they're out the way, so I think we can get on and give this a good clean. So first job to do is going to be cleaning the filter. Now, this is a nature pond, obviously, so it's not got conventional filtration on it. The main filtration of this pond is all the plants, the rocks and the gravel that is providing, well, surface area for bacteria to grow on, and then the plants are going to be using up a good majority of the nutrients produced by the breaking down waste. So there's not really conventional filtration on here. But that being said, up here behind this lily that I put there last year, it outgrew the pond and it got a bit mad in the pond. As you can see, it's quite chunky up there now. It filled the pond, so I threw it up in the filter because it's an open topped filter. And yeah, it's grown a little bit big and a little bit large, and I've got to get that out because the sponges for the filter are underneath it. So I want to get to them, I want to clean them out first, and then we'll move on to some of the other stuff, but this is going to be tricky. Now, in a normal filter, you would probably have other medias other than just sponges, things like biomedias and stuff like that, that really is going to be the place where all your good bacteria is living. Now, you want to try and keep them alive, essentially, especially if you've got a heavy stocked pond, because if you go and clean out all that filter media and jet wash it, essentially there might be nothing left to break down fish waste. Obviously this pond, again, there's no real life other than frogs, toads and things like that living in here, so it's not too much of a worry. But if you've got a really stocked pond full of fish, be careful when cleaning out your filter media. I better go turn off the filter for this. This way I can actually get in here. Now it looks like the lily is actually rooted into the foam, which is going to be a bit of an issue. Let's just drag it out and see what we can do. Oh my word. That's a good noise. Our first pond friend. You go down there, buddy. It's throwing off babies everywhere. A second pond friend. So actually the sponges are really not that dirty up here. They're actually quite clean. That's probably because of this massive root ball of lily that's sat underneath it. So I'll be honest, I don't think I'm going to do anything with them. I might just vac out the bottom of there just so that that's clean. But again, to be honest, because of the amount of food that this plant is going to be using up and the amount of waste it's going to be using, there's not actually much I need to do to it. That's the good thing with a filter system that's reliant on a lot of planting, is that, yeah, to be honest, it ends up as just a bit of a natural system and it cleans itself in a roundabout way. So like I said, normally I'd be doing a big clean on it, as in like I'd take all the foams out, I'd wash them all down, I'd keep the biomedia, any of like the ceramics or the balls that you get in the bottom of the filters, that's where your good bacteria live. I'd put them to one side and I'd just give them a quick swill out in some old pond water. They don't want to be perfectly clean because otherwise you're washing all your good bacteria away. So the other thing I like doing when unsettling a pond is using some live filter bacteria. The good thing with this is it will recolonize the filter when you've sort of messed around with it or you've washed everything out. Gets everything going again, essentially. Especially as it's just starting to warm up here, so everything's just starting to wake up, the algae, the waste, everything's starting to move. So using this at this time of year means it will have the best chance of getting a good bacterial growth throughout the season. So with that done, we can now clean the main pond itself. So when you've mucked around with a pond and you've messed around with the filter, you might end up with loads and loads of small particles floating around in the pond, which is just normal. Now there's a few things you can do with these. You can use a really fine pond net and try and catch them out and net them out as best as you can, but you're always going to lose a few. You are most of the time going to be relying on your filter to catch them, or you're going to be relying on them just settling out and letting nature take its course at the bottom of your pond. If you want them to settle out quicker, you can use a flocculant. Now flocculants essentially bind all the particles together. The one that I normally use is called Clean. They will bind all the particles into a bigger particle, and it means your filter can deal with them quicker, because sometimes the filters are just not fine enough to catch all these fine particles. Now, throughout the year, I will use a sludge remover on my pond. Now, that is just a mix of good bacteria that go in and break down or help break down all the waste. It's never going to get rid of all of it because, well, you look at what drops into a pond. You're never going to get rid of all of it just via bacteria, but it certainly helps. That, alongside me netting out any leaves and twigs and things like that I see, and cutting back the plants when they need it, helps maintain the bottom of the pond. The other thing you have to be careful of when dealing with a lot of waste in the bottom of the pond is stirring it up can cause issues. If you're not actually going to remove it and you're just going to stir it up, it can release nutrients into the pond. So in a few weeks' time, after stirring it all up, you'll end up with an algae bloom because of all the nutrients that you've stirred up that were all locked up down in the bottom of the pond. The other thing is if you've got a fish pond with lots of fish in it, stirring up those nutrients can actually lower the oxygen levels, especially in hotter months. It can cause oxygen drop and then you can have issues with your fish. So be cautious when stirring up muck at the bottom of the pond. If you've got a lot of it, you're probably better getting a pond vacuum, which is what I'm going to do next. We are going to pull out the big guns today. Now, as I've said, I have kept this pond running for the last, crikey, 4 years, really with very little, if any, vacuuming, to be honest. It's been very good, but I have been obviously dosing good bacterias and sludge busters and been netting the pond fairly regularly. So that's what's kept it going. It's one of those things. It would be very similar to your flower bed. If you left your flower bed for weeks and weeks and weeks on end and didn't do anything with it, it would be full of weeds and horribleness in no time. And a pond is very similar. Just because it's under the water doesn't mean you can forget about it. So tinkering with it, giving it a bit of a clean, netting the algae out, netting the leaves out will be what keeps your pond running cleaner for longer. Now, whilst the pond is drained, I'm going to actually give my pump a clean out because, again, I haven't done that in a little while. Now, for most people, your pond pump will be sat in the bottom of the pond somewhere, you know, sat piece of pipe going up to the filter and background. That's the standard. Irritatingly, I built this pond a little bit different. It's called an intake bay, so it takes all the muck into this little sort of skimmer area, and then my pump is underneath a big pile of gravel under my feet currently. It's a really good way of doing it because it doesn't need as much maintenance, but when it does need maintenance, you have to dig all the gravel out. So yeah, let's get the gravel out, let's check this pump out and see how well it's done over the last probably 9 months since I cleaned it out. So this is the pump that runs the waterfall and the filtration system on this pond. Now you can see the cage has actually caught quite a lot of debris. There's quite a lot of muck in there, so it's definitely going to be worthwhile giving this a quick thorough clean out. You should really do this to a pump fairly often because what you can see inside there is actually the impeller, and that's a spinning sort of, well, propeller, impeller is what I meant to say. Well, that's a spinning unit that pumps the water up through here. So really these should be cleaned out every now and again. It varies from pond to pond, but sometimes it might be once a month, sometimes it might be once a year like this one. But yeah, let's give this a quick wash off and make it as clean as new. So inside the pump cage will generally be a motor. Ugh. And if it wants to come out, this one is the same. There we go. Get rid of that. Now that's your main pump motor. So this is where the impeller is housed inside here. You don't have to use something like this, but it's the only thing I have to hand. Now once you've got all the screws out, sorry, I might have nudged the camera there. You can get into your impeller and you can see how mucky this impeller is. Now that's not the bit to really worry about. That is the bit to worry about. And once it's got all that muck on it, it literally slows down the pump. It doesn't, yeah, it just doesn't perform as well as it should. So giving that a good clean and a wipe off is really the best thing to do. 90% of the pumps that I used to get back at the shop was literally this. it would be covered and caked in muck. There would be gravel or sand down inside the well, down in there, and that would stop the pump from working. So if you can clean this up, 90% of the time the pumps would run. You don't need a new pump all the time. It might just be a dirty impeller, so clean this first. Anyway, less talking. I'm going to clean this up because this is gross. How much better and cleaner does that look? It doesn't need to be perfect, but obviously the main thing is having that well down in there clean and free of debris, and this free of algae. This one obviously just clips back together. Every pump is slightly different, but the main components will be a motor like this inside some sort of housing and casing. So it's just working out how, where, and what you have to unscrew to get to it. Now let's get this pump back together anyway. So with the pump cleaned out and the vacuuming done, vacuuming or hoovering? Vacuuming, because Hoover's a brand, that's right. So with the vacuuming done, well, it's ready to fill back up now. One thing I want to do while the pond is half drained though, is I do want to cut back this fuchsia and a couple of the plants because I can't easily get to them when the pond is full of water. So I'm going to get that done in a minute. But I just wanted to mention that loads of people are against doing maintenance on ponds. And I say against, but you do have to be careful. Obviously any maintenance is going to disturb the local wildlife and fauna and flora and everything like that. I get it. As I've already mentioned in this video though, ponds, their one goal is to fill themselves up full of sludge. And if you don't sort of tinker with it every now and again, all that happens is it goes stagnant, it goes anaerobic at the bottom, which, yeah, just goes putrid essentially, and you end up nothing living in there. So you've got to do this sort of maintenance. And like I say, this is the first time in 4 years that I've sort of even put anything like, or done, not put, done anything like this to this pond. So yeah, I understand people's concerns about maintenance and, you know, the insects and the bugs and disturbing everything, but if I left this pond for the next 10 years, all that would happen was it'd be full of leaves. Nothing would live in there because it's 2 foot of silt and rubbish and horribleness. And it would be a, I don't want to say it, but a sort of dead pond really. There'd be very little living in there. Now obviously there would be some things that would make their homes there, obviously, but you do have to keep the maintenance up on a wildlife pond. Otherwise I just find it goes to mess. And ultimately it's in your garden. You do not want a stinking green mess in the corner of your garden. There's got to be a bit of give and take with the wildlife and with having something pretty that you can sit next to. Anyway, enough waffling about that. I'm going to get on. We've got to refill it. We've got to cut some plants back. Yeah, we're nearly done. This has been a bit of a maintenance session. This is going good though. We're nearly there. Now this Aquarius here is one of my favourite plants because of its evergreen and just looks so good. But this started off as one pot 4 years ago. It was one of the first plants I put in there. But I really need to hack it back because it's covered my whole waterfall down here and it's growing down into the pond. Now the good thing is with these grasses is because of the way I've planted them, I don't plant them in any soil. So I just plant them on their own. Pond friend. Pond friend. You can go down there, bud. I just plant them straight into the gravel because they really don't need much nutrients. You don't need to worry about soil with these. You can see how they grow. And they'll just use the soil, not the soil, they'll use the nutrients from the pond rather than the soil. So yeah, let's get this one stripped down a bit. I was going to chop this iris back, but it's yet to spill over the edge into the deeper part of the pond. So I think I'm just going to leave it there. It fills that area nicely and it's got a great purple flower in the summer. So leave that one. I think that's all the chopping back. I leave the pond quite wild, to be honest. So I think that'll be perfect for the minute. I just spotted these in the pond. Got loads of them. So they're little tubes. And what they are is they're caddisfly larvae. I think they're caddisfly larvae anyway. But they create these little tubes to live in while they're in their larval stage, and then they become a caddisfly. Didn't even realise I had them in my pond. That's what I like about ponds. Weird things turn up. Our next job is to refill the pond. Now this is fairly simple for me because I'll be honest, I use tap water. Now you will see a lot of people recommending to use rainwater, which is absolutely fine, but I like to educate, I like to talk people through it. I use rainwater every now and again in this pond, and that's absolutely fine, but I know at the moment my water butt has got the winter's fill of moss and muck off of my roof in the bottom of it. So there is a deep layer of sludge in the bottom. Now if I put that water into this pond, I can guarantee you I'm putting nutrients in there that's going to feed the algae. Yes, it will feed the plants as well, but unfortunately the algae normally takes hold quicker than the plants. So I guess using rainwater is fine, as long as you know the source you're getting it from is clean and where you're storing it is clean. One thing I wasn't actually going to mention in this video is it does also depend on where your rainwater's come from. Thanks, Blackbird. As mad as that sounds, it does depend where your rainwater's come from. Well, actually, last year my car got covered in Saharan dust after a rainstorm, and essentially the rain clouds had picked up the dust in the Sahara, brought it over. When it rained, it dropped it in on my car. Well, not just on my car, it didn't single my car out, but the rain that came down was full of dust. Now, the problem is that could have ended up in your water butt and then ended up in the pond. Now, Saharan sand or dust might not be so much of a problem, but if it picks up nutrients or pollutants or toxins or any manner of what can be picked up in rainwater, it probably wouldn't bother us, but when you concentrate it and put it down into your pond, it can cause issues. So like I say, I am just going to be using tap water, and I'm just going to be using some tap water chlorine remover, because that will get rid of any of the problems or any of the nasties that is in the tap water. Sometimes it's far easier to treat tap water and get that to what your pond needs, rather than using rainwater and having to worry about algae and things like that. It's a personal call, it's a personal choice. I use both, but do be careful. I suppose you could always test your rainwater and see if there is any nutrients in there, but again, pH swings, KH swings, I know what my tap water comes out at, so yeah, I'm just going to be using this. For this pond, I don't use a great deal of this stuff, to be honest. It's normally a few capfuls, and they're quite easy to dose because you've got this little like 10ml measure. But yeah, this pond doesn't take a lot, and for the few pennies that it costs to use that, I'd rather do that. Right, let's turn this waterfall on, get this back up and running. Right then, here we go. I just love that sound. Now the sun's come out, so sorry about the brightness behind me, but there's very little places in my garden now that aren't sun-free. Aren't sun-free? That are shady, that's what I meant. But I'm going to put some sludge remover in. This is going to help with any of the pockets of waste that I missed. And then I am done. I can sit here throughout the spring, or what's left of it, and the summer, and enjoy my pond. I've got some plans for some more planting soon. Not that there's much space, but there's a few that I want to get hold of, so I'm definitely going to get hold of them fairly soon. I was just filming the last segment, and this little dude climbed out the water. Look at that, it's a little smooth newt. I'm guessing it was where I sat. Oh, so cool. I'm guessing it was where I sat here and disturbed some of the gravel. Now, you shouldn't need to do as big a clean and sort out as I've done in this video. To be honest with you, this is like a big start-up clean, ready for the spring. And as I've said, I've just sort of tinkered with it for the last 4 years. I've never properly cleaned it and properly got into it. So I think it's one of those things, if you do it once and do it well, it'll probably last you for another 4 or 5 years quite happily. But as I've said at the start, it totally depends on the type of pond and how much plant life you have in there and so on and so on. I suppose it's a little bit like weeding your flower bed. If you do it once properly, it's easier to keep on top of it. But if you just try and remove 1 or 2 at a time, it takes a lot longer. So I've been joined by Roma now. I hope you found the video useful. We're going to sit here and chill out for the rest of the day, to be honest, because that was enough hard work for me. I don't normally work that hard, to be honest. But yeah, hope you found it useful. Watch out for those future videos on plants and pumps and all of that sort of stuff. And yeah, much love, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, Roma.